Hi, I'm Miss Fran from Reed Memorial Library, and I'm really excited that you're here for Storytime. We have some really good books today. So let's start with our opening song. If you'd like to read a book, clap your hands. If you'd like to read a book, clap your hands. If you'd like to read a book, come on close and take a look. If you'd like to read a book, clap your hands. Get ready. If you'd like to read a book, stomp your feet. If you'd like to read a book, stomp your feet. If you'd like to read a book, come on close and take a look. If you'd like to read a book, stomp your feet. If you'd like to read a book, shout hooray, hooray! If you'd like to read a book, shout hooray, hooray! If you'd like to read a book, come on close and take a look. If you'd like to read a book, shout hooray, hooray! I'm glad you're here. One of the first books we're going to read is called Carl and the Meaning of Life. Now this book, which was written by Deborah Friedman, is one of 5 books that are being considered for the Buckeye Award. And if you look on the events page on the calendar and click on October the 10th, you will see a list of all 5 books that are being considered for this award. We did one last week, which is called We Don't Eat Our Classmates. And that's a funny book. So this one today is one of the 5, and you can vote on which of the 5 books you like the best. So this one is called Carl and the Meaning of Life by Deborah Friedman. Can you see Carl in the picture? What kind of an animal do you think Carl is? Carl was not a bird. Carl was not a bear or a beaver. Carl was an earthworm. He lived underground, moving, always moving, burrowing, tunneling, digesting dead leaves, feasting and casting. He's turning hard dirt into fluffy soil day after day. That's what worms do, isn't it? Why? Asked a field mouse gathering seeds. Why do you do that? Why? Carl did not know why, but now he needed to find out. So Carl stopped making fluffy soil. I'll be right back, he told the field mouse. There he goes. He spotted a rabbit. Maybe she knew. Why do I do what I do? He asked her. Oh, goodness, dear, she said. I do not know. I do what I do for my babies. Look at all the rabbit babies. But Carl did not have babies. A fox appeared, and Carl turned to the fox. Why do I do what I do? Asked Carl. Who do I do it for? For whom? Replied the fox. Alas, my meal awaits. I am here for the hunt. But Carl did not want to hunt. Why are you talking to a fox? Cried a squirrel. Carl was startled. Because the field mouse is waiting and wants to know what I am here for. It's a nice new book. It's hard to turn the pages. The squirrel declared, I'm here to plant trees. Trees are where I sleep. And you can see the squirrel is holding an acorn, which is the seed to an oak tree. But Carl could not sleep, not high in a tree and not without an answer for the mouse. So he pushed on. He pushed on and on. Hours turned into days until the soil was no longer fluffy. The ground around Carl turned barren and dry. While he continued to search, and look, the deer says, what? Who? And why? And Carl is crawling off in the dry, hard dirt, and he says, sigh. But the birds had flown off to find grasses and fluff, and the bear trundled away to look for berries, and soon there was nobody left to talk to. What about me? Called Carl. The clouds were silent, and so was the air. Then Carl heard his sniffle echo, followed by a squeak. I can't find any grubs, a voice cried. It was the saddest ground beetle he had ever seen. Carl peeked under a stone. No grubs. Then he poked the dirt. It was hard like rock. Where was his fluffy soil? Suddenly, Carl knew what he needed to do. I'll be back, he promised. For hours into days and weeks into months, Carl munched, digested, left castings, and tunneled and turned that hard dirt back into rich soil. There he is, working away. You made my seeds grow, said the mouse. Clover blossomed once again, and the rabbit came back with her kits. The squirrel returned to plant new trees. The fox was lured by the hunt, all of them able to do what they do. How? Well, why not? Asked Carl. That's the end of the story. Doesn't Carl look happy there? So Carl found out that even though he was just a lowly earthworm, that he had a very important job to do, making the soil all nice and fluffy and fertile for things to grow. That was a good book, I thought. Well, believe it or not, I have a song for you. I'm going to move around here just for a second. A song to sing, and it's on your kit paper. And it's called Worms, Worms, Worms. So it has some actions, and we're going to try it a couple times so you can do the actions with me. So it starts out like this. There are worms in the garden, in the ground. There are worms, and they're moving all around. And they wiggle, and they giggle, and they... What's the next word? They wiggle, and they giggle, and they help the garden grow. When the rain comes down, they come up to say hello. Let's try it again. We'll probably both get it right this time. So do the actions, even if you can't get the words, okay? There are worms in the garden, in the ground. There are worms, and they're moving all around. And they wiggle, and they giggle, and they help the garden grow. When the rain comes down, they come up to say hello. Okay, here's the chorus. Most of the words to the chorus is just worms. Worms, 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 worms in the garden. Can you wiggle? Worms, 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 worms in the ground. Okay, let's try the whole thing all over again. Do you like my worm song? I like it a lot. There are worms in the garden, in the ground. There are worms, and they're moving all around. And they wiggle and they giggle and they help the garden grow. When the rain comes down, they come up to say hello. There are worms in the garden, in the ground. There are worms, and they're moving all around. And they wiggle and they giggle and they help the garden grow. When the rain comes down, they come up to say hello. Worms in the garden. Worms in the ground. Okay, now here's the end part. Sing it with me. There are worms in the garden, in the ground. There are worms, and they're moving all around. And they wiggle and they giggle and they help the garden grow. When the rain comes down, they come up to say hello. Have you ever seen worms in your garden or on the ground after the rain? I like worms. I spent a lot of time when I was a child playing with worms because my father liked to be a fisherman and he would always have worms with him. They're really incredible. I have a book here I want to show you and it's called Earthworms. And I'm not going to read every word of this book because there's a lot of words in it, but I'm going to show you some pictures of earthworms and tell you some things about them because they're really very incredible little creatures. This is by Claire Llewellyn and Barry Watts. Can you see that picture of the worm on the front? That's an actual photograph of a worm by the ground in the grass. Earthworms. Here's a picture of an earthworm. There are lots of different kinds of earthworms. And so if you went out in an area in your yard, you have to ask permission first, but if you had a shovel and you could dig and pull the soil up, you would find worms underneath. There's so many different kinds. Here's a picture of someone finding earthworms, like I said, digging in the ground. And here's an earthworm in the grass. They live in the woods, they live in the meadows, they like to climb underneath trees, underneath leaves and bushes. Any place where it's nice and moist. Because worms like to be moist, although they're not slimy. They're very simple animals. They don't have any bones. They don't have any lungs or eyes or ears. And even though on your kit paper, the worm I put on there, he has a mouth and eyes and he's singing a song, real worms that you find in the garden, they do not have a mouth like that. They're like a big long tube. And as they go through the ground, they eat all kinds of vegetable matter that maybe is decaying, like old leaves or old grass. And when it comes out the other end, it's very fertile. They breathe through their skin. Isn't that interesting? Can you breathe through your skin? Not me. They breathe through their skin. And when the rain comes down, like we said in the song, their body absorbs so much of that water, they have to come up to the surface so that they don't drown. So that is so interesting, I thought. So here's in the book about Carl and the meaning of life, talked about a worm casting. Well, it's kind of like a little pile of worm poop. That's what it is. But that is what makes the ground, the grass the grass grow, but the ground very fertile, like Carl was doing. And worms have bristles on their skin, and that helps them to move. That's very important because when they're contracted and they expand themselves out, then the bristles kind of grab onto the ground and they can pull the rest of themselves along, and that's how they move along the ground. So I just thought worms were so interesting. Can you imagine being a worm like Carl and finding that you have an important job to do? So now I'm going to show you the craft. Oops, the craft that is in your kit is a worm. So I put instructions on the back of your kit paper down here on how to put your worm together, but I wanted you to see what he looks like. There's my worm, and he's got eyes, even though real worms don't, but my worm is cute. So, and he's got like an accordion shape. So when you want him to crawl across the table or wherever, you can take one stick and make him come out. That's how a real worm would move. And then he's going to draw up the back part of himself. Just like a little accordion. There he goes. He's moving across the table. Maybe he's looking for some soil. Did you ever see a worm that had accidentally, when it was raining, he had accidentally crawled out onto the sidewalk or the driveway? And then he was kind of stuck and he couldn't figure out how to get back? There he is. He's moving very slowly. All right, so that's your worm. That's in your kit paper. I hope you can have fun playing with him. The last book that I'm going to show you today is another book that has kind of a cute sense of humor. And this is called Paco and the Drum. And it's by Matthew Forsythe. What is Paco doing here in this picture? He's playing the drum, right? She's got her sticks for the drum, her mallets, way up in the air. I bet she's going to bring them down with a big crash. She is playing that drum very loudly. The biggest mistake Paco's parents ever made was giving her a drum. They had made mistakes before, like the slingshot. Look, Paco's got herself in the slingshot. She's about ready to shoot herself across the yard. And the llama. She's got a llama in the house. Look where her parents are. Their feet are sticking out from underneath the llama. That's not a good idea. And the balloon. Come back, Paco, you're floating away. But the drum was the biggest mistake. Oh, she looks happy to get that drum. We shouldn't have given her that drum, said her father. What? Said her mother. The drum is too loud. I can't hear you. The drum was a big mistake, said her father. That sounds like a wonderful idea, said her mother, who still couldn't hear what he was saying. There's Paco playing the drum on the bed. The next day, her father said, Paco, why don't you take your drum outside for a little while? But don't make too much noise. We're just a little frog family that lives in a mushroom, and we don't like drawing attention to ourselves. Paco agreed, and she set out as quickly as she could. And as quietly as she could. Look at her go. It had just rained, and the forest was sparkling like an emerald. And it was very quiet. Too quiet. What do you think Paco's thinking in that picture? Paco started tapping on her drum just to keep herself company. But something stirred behind her. A raccoon playing a banjo started following her, so Paco hit her drum louder. And then a rabbit playing a trumpet started following them, but Paco kept playing her drum. And then a wolf, who couldn't really play anything but was very happy to be near the music, joined in, and Paco still played her drum. But then the wolf ate the rabbit, and Paco stopped playing her drum and faced the wolf and said, "No more eating band members or you're out of the band." I think she also, "I'm sorry," said the wolf, and he meant it. I think she also made him spit the rabbit out. So I think she's back. And then they all started playing again, and soon there was a crowd of animals playing instruments. And a crowd of animals following them around, enjoying the music. That looks like fun, doesn't it? And they were all following Paco. "Paco, your dinner is ready," shouted her father. No one answered, but he could hear music in the distance. And the music grew louder and louder until the crowd swept through the house and carried Paco's parents off into the woods. "Oh no," said her father. "Oh dear," said her mother. "I think that's Paco down in front," said her father. "And you know what?" "What?" said her mother, who was just getting to the best part of her book. "I think she's pretty good." And no one could hear what he was saying, but if they could, they all would have agreed. So maybe getting Paco the drum wasn't a mistake after all. That was a cute story, I thought. So, okay, I'm going to show you one more thing that's on your kit paper, and I'm going to show you another craft that you can make. At the bottom of your kit paper here, there are some titles that you can check out on Hoopla, which means you can just do it on your computer or on your phone or your tablet. And one of the books that I had suggested is called Making Musical Instruments with Kids. It's by Bart Hopkin. And I think it's a lot of fun to make musical instruments with kids. So I'm going to show you another little craft that you can make with your children. And this is a musical shaker. So if you're singing, "There are worms in the garden, in the ground," you could make your own percussion instrument that goes right with it. This is very simple. I've used it with children of all ages, all kinds of fun stuff we've done. So we just start out with, it can be a toilet paper roll, or it could be the roll from a paper towel, which this is. It's a little bit longer that way. And I took a plain piece of paper, just cut it so it would fit. And you can just roll the paper around the tube, kind of make it fit. And then I took a stapler and I just stapled both ends so it kind of stay together. And then I took my markers, because I like colorful things. I took markers and I just put all kinds of pretty colors on it so you could color it. And then you take one end and smash it down a little bit. You don't want to smash the whole thing, just the end. And put a couple staples along there so it really holds well. We'll do 4 for good measure. And then I had some buttons, and they were just laying around, but you could use anything. You have to keep in mind the age of your child. And some people use beans or stones or whatever, and you put them inside. And then now when you go to staple the other end, see how this one is this way? So this one, you're going to squish it down the opposite direction so that it can't just go flat very easily. And then when you've got your rattling ingredients inside, then you staple the other end, and voila, you have a musical shaker. ready to play with whatever music you might have, whether it's on the radio or a CD, or maybe you want to sing the Worms, Worms, Worms song again. So I'm really glad you came today, and I hope that you have enjoyed the stories about Paco and her drum, and about earthworms, Carl, and his meaning of life. And so we'd like to sing goodbye. So I'll sing with you. You ready? I'm glad you came today. I'm glad you came today. I hope that you will come again. I'm glad you came today. One more time. I'm glad you came today. I'm glad you came today. I hope that you will come again. I'm glad you came today. Don't forget Miss Haley's story time tomorrow morning at 10:30. Mrs. Young's story time Thursday at 10:30. See you there. Bye.